Welcome everyone today for the K-Core presentation of Sprawling Over America, Why the Endangered Species Act Isn't Enough. Our presenter today is Dr. Karen Shragg. She is a naturalist, author, a poet, an activist working on many different fronts. And she is going to be presenting to us today information about population and how human population is massively affecting the endangered species across North America, primarily in the US, but she also has some information that pertains particularly to Canada as well. So she has going to be giving this presentation today. And with that, Karen, thank you for coming and talking to us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I don't see the slides just yet, but I think here it comes. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to K-Core. Thank you to Art and Jean and everybody there for having me. I really appreciate it. This presentation is really for all who love wild animals and are concerned about their future. Advance.
So there we go. I'm going to put it on pause. And
Okay.
okay, we're paused right now,
Okay.
and for some reason, when I hit next, it doesn't want to go.
What about that arrow on the top? Or
You're actually not on slideshow either.
Oh, there's an issue. It was working just fine a minute ago.
We could start from the beginning again if you wish, but we got to resolve getting through one slide after the other first. I suggest try the space bar.
There we go. Just a minute, I gotta.
You need to be on slideshow before the forward movement works.
Just a minute now. There we go. Okay. Okay, I'm good to go. So we're on pause. Were you finished with the first slide, Karen?
yes, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to put it on the second slide, and I'm going to resume. All right. Go ahead.
Now, conservation biologists are really to be applauded for the tireless work they do to help wildlife. They do everything from captive breeding programs to wildland protections, and so much is being done to protect wildlife. Advance. But the problem is, whoops, there you go. The problem is that it's just not enough. And if you look at this particular graph, you'll see that invertebrates are not even included in it. And invertebrates are going extinct 8 times faster than the wild animals, the vertebrates, the mammals, the things that people mostly care about. Advance. So the talk that I'm giving is called Sprawling Over America. We have to remember America is not just the US, it's also Canada, and why the Endangered Species Act is not enough. Advance. So what are we doing to save wildlife? We're doing a lot. We're preserving and cleaning and managing, we're restoring, we're doing all kinds of things. And if you look at the 5th dot down, educate school children. Well, that's what I did for 35 years. I educated school children and the public to what they can do, stop feeding wildlife, do all kinds of things. We've advocated for wildlife corridors. We do a lot. And the picture there you see on your screen is the endangered endemic Vancouver Marmot, which because of tremendous efforts have gone from about 70 several decades ago to 250. It is BC's most endangered species. And there have been those successes. Next. These iconic species, and I'm very, very lucky to have seen, I think all of them, but the California condor and the black-footed ferret have been getting some success. They have been recovering from the brink. We see a lot of bald eagles, especially in Minnesota. Last I checked, there were 300 nesting pairs in the area. I see them every day when I go to visit my dad, just 20 minutes away. So there are quite a few successes that we can really pat ourselves on the back for. Next. Others are holding their own. This happens to be my favorite bird species, the Sandhill Crane, and they still can be counted in the hundreds of thousands like they were at the turn of the century. Next. But what of their future? What do we really know about their future? And where are you on the worry scale about their future success? Are you okay at a 1? Are you kind of worried? Or are you off the charts at a 10? Well, there's a lot to be worried about. There are 22 species of birds, fish, and mussels, and bats, and 1 species of plants were actually declared extinct just last year. So again, the same slide showing that these are the extinctions that we've experienced since 1500. But why? Why are we in this predicament? After all, the US, we have the Endangered Species Act to protect them. Next. And in Canada, I'm going to say we because we're all in the Americas, have Sarah. I love that name, was my late mother's name, although she spelled it with an H. It means Species at Risk Act, and it is designed to prevent wildlife from disappearing. The UN has the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the trouble is that no matter how many actions they list that they're doing, they never list the major reason why we're losing species by the bucketful. 3 billion birds in North America gone in the last 50 years. But the money did flow. Federal and state agencies, at least here in the US, spent $1.5 billion on endangered and threatened species in fiscal year 2016 alone. So money has flowed. So what forces are working against our efforts? Is it apathy? Is it lack of awareness? What is it all about? All wildlife devotees have been asking these questions for decades. I don't know any wildlife person who isn't working so hard on this issue. But first of all, we have to ask ourselves what type of evidence, what kind of argument would convince anyone listening to this, or if it gets spread around on YouTube, that there might be a whole new way to go about saving wildlife, and how much proof and research would be the right amount. While proof is much available, the barrier to the evidence is often a suspicion that there's some other agenda going on. I can assure you that my intentions and the intentions of my sources are honorable, and that false accusations are just getting in the way of helping the future for wildlife. These are just a list of some of my sources, just to let you know where I get my information from. Some people have accused me of just this being an opinion of mine, but from Californians for Population Stabilization to the Pew Research Center, and particularly a really good last piece of research I based a lot of this on was called From Sea to Sprawling Sea, Quantifying the Loss of Open Space in America. These are resources I really invite you all to check out if you don't know about them already. So if you live anywhere near a city, you've probably noticed lately that the land everywhere is being converted from freeways to skyscrapers, apartments at a rapid pace. I know that the homes around here are being slated for apartment buildings. It just feels like we're living in this perpetual construction zone. Now, our ecological footprint, which has been mapped out very clearly, shows that we take up so much room, more room than we even have. That's why we have to import so many goods, so much energy from other countries. And for your consideration, please note that just in the United States alone, we lost an additional 17,800 square miles of natural habitat, and that is where the wildlife lives. That was just between the year 2002 and 2017. So we're losing all this land, and that's where wildlife is. We have to confront that. It isn't just climate change, which usually gets the blame. Next. Perhaps these forces working against us feel so overpowering that they rename unnamed and unchallenged, but we have to name them, we have to blame them. Recent sprawl studies do shed an important light on them. As I mentioned, now a different statistic, just look at it, 67% of rural land was lost, which is about 11,950 square miles, developed to meet the needs of 37 million more residents just in the United States. But this is going on everywhere. Next. In the literature and in the field, the conservation field, there really is a missing focus on the growth of our population, the growth of our economies, and the whole, what I like to call or refer to as the human enterprise. There's a famous and often used quote of IPAT, impact equals population times affluence times technology. In this case, the impact is on our beloved wildlife, and it so often doesn't get named. But if you look at this graph, those are extinctions in the dark green line, and the light green line is the human population. They mimic each other for a reason. They're being tackled differently by different groups. Either you're a population group or you're a wildlife group, but what if they were really tackled together? I love Edward Abbey. He's a controversial character, but I often quote his famous quote, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell." If we tackle these two together, we might just succeed. If we really think about it, it really is the biggest threat to wildlife. And Chris Packham talked about how we can't just talk about individual species if we don't deal with the ever increasing size of the world's population. Next. Now, squirrels and deer and crows are abundant. And if you say wildlife to maybe the average urban person who is not an outdoor enthusiast or naturalist like me, they'd say, oh, there's plenty of deer, there's plenty of crows, there's plenty of geese for sure. But those are animals that can take advantage of fragmented habitats, but so many of our iconic species cannot. Speaking of iconic species, wolves and bears live in Alaska. Canada has more wolves than any other country in the world. You can be proud of that, but they are being harmed a lot by anthropogenic climate change because of melting ice caps. The poor polar bears can't get the seals because there's not enough ice flows to get out there, and the ice is melting. Those are all due to that. Next. But where growth encroaches, smaller mammals struggle to survive. This is a slide of Vancouver, BC, where more and more population growth is harming the endemic marmot, which I mentioned before. And those smaller mammals struggle to survive because of population growth. They also have issues with climate change, to be sure, but keep in mind that climate change is really a subset of overpopulation, because in the modern world, the more people, the more energy used, the more fossil fuels burned. Next. It's certainly easier to look at other populations in other countries and show that, oh, they have a lot of people, therefore we understand that their wildlife is harmed. Next. The lemurs that you just saw on the last slide live in Madagascar and a few islands, but they're the only place in the world these wonderful animals live. And right now, 31% of the 110 species are critically endangered, mainly due to human population expansion. They burn down their habitat to grow rice to feed the people, and their rate of growth is mostly due to their fertility rate, which is an average of 4.1 per woman. Next. It's much more challenging to see growth as the enemy of wildlife in the developed world, especially in the US. It's just something that we have a hard time getting our heads wrapped around. Maybe we just don't see that wildlife is part of what we do. Here in America, in the United States, we're under the delusion that our resources are inexhaustible. I love that. The myth of superabundance. I'm going to borrow that from Stuart Udall. The myth of superabundance. It really is a myth. This is a limited planet, and we keep shoving more and more high demanders onto that planet, and it just doesn't end well. Next. Our ecological footprint from our still growing 332 million. Now that I say that, this is going to date this because that's going to keep growing by 80 million a year in the world, and about 2 to 3 million in the United States. And we demand 10 million square miles more from the earth. That's 3 times bigger than the land in the US. So if we're demanding 10 million square miles, it is just overkill. Now we could be living more simply, that would be wonderful. But number one, it's really hard to teach people to do that. And number two, it's really, really easier to have less people on the planet if we do it humanely. So using this scale, do you believe we can preserve enough space for wildlife while we're still growing as rapidly as we are? I would say no. Number 10. When asked, does the US have a responsibility to the rest of the world to preserve a certain amount of its natural habitat? Guess what? A recent survey said an overwhelming yes. 62% responded that we have a responsibility. And I would think that Canadians would think that as well. The Pew Research Center tells us, though, that 88% future population growth is not projected to come from fertility rates, but from immigration if our current policies continue. So what do? We're a nation of immigrants. We can be proud of our immigrant makeup, but also being acutely aware of our overpopulation situation. Like I like to say, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can do these things by merging 2 completely seemingly different stories as one. We can be creative rather than oppressive in our immigration policies and encourage something besides an open door and a closed door. Perhaps a closely monitored revolving door needs to be considered. Next. If we're looking at growth from an upstream long-term perspective, it's the most productive. My book that came out in 2015 said we have to move upstream because being downstream keeps us from seeing what we're really doing to the planet. So in the US, the migration is growing by millions, and in Canada too. Canada's population is almost twice the pace of any other G7 country, rising from 5.2% to just under 37 million people in 2021. So Canada may be huge in size, but most of it's uninhabitable. Due to population growth, Canada's biocapacity is rapidly shrinking. That's the ability to support wildlife. Fortunately, promoting more restrictions on our policies does not have to be the racial quicksand it's reputed to be. A closer look reveals that if we curb mass immigration, it benefits the descendants of slavery who keep getting shortchanged in the hiring lines. This was really detailed in great research and great detail in the book Back of the Hiring Line by Roy Beck. Next. And it talks about historical mass immigration, that when it was stopped, actually the descendants of Africans slaves were actually able to be hired more and created a Black middle class. So when people say, if you're against immigration, you must be racist, I refer to this history and say, that's not true. That's not true. It really benefits Americans, especially the most disenfranchised among us. Next. Mass immigration also negatively impacts America's Hispanic population. Many of you will know of Cesar Chavez. He was an activist, a labor leader who was opposed to illegal immigration because he knew more and more people would be negatively impacted in his community. Next. And there is good news in this picture. Laws are changeable and have changed over time, and numbers were much lower when many of our grandparents came over. I think that when it comes to immigration, we just have to mimic the behavior of a good parent. Set limits, We need to enforce without abusive punishment. And a good parent does not look the other way when those rules are broken. We need to be able to have justifiable rules, and they will have multiple and beneficial outcomes. The price tag of growth is long. We just cannot continue to exponentially grow without dire consequences. And may I say that growth is the umbrella under which fertility and immigration live. Let me say that again. Growth is the umbrella. Whatever is causing growth is what must be addressed, because otherwise we have less fresh water, more energy demands, more crowds, less good jobs to go around, more pollution, and so much more. We'll have less room for wildlands and wildlife and all the animals that live there. Recognizing both of our countries, the US and Canada, our limit is the very first step. We have limits and we have to honor them. Growth undermines all of our efforts, for it eventually knocks down all the doors of the conservation projects. You can save an animal and then all of a sudden, here comes the encroachment. If the black-footed ferret could talk, you could hear this voice echoing, we don't need more green bulldozers. We need less bulldozing. I don't want to see bulldozers running on electricity or whatever magic energy we think we have. Now I want to read this whole quote, even though I know you can read it yourself, because we just lost Dave Foreman this week, which makes me tear up. We need to speak more from the question of how many, not who. To get out of the thicket, we need people to understand that cutting immigration is not anti-immigrant and not tied to nativism or racism, but tied directly to our ecological future. If I had a hat on, I'd take it off to Dave Foreman. What a leader. These groups have chosen to stay focused at a species level, which means all of these organizations, what we call big green sometimes, will not talk about it. Next. And some, like the Center for Biological Diversity, have actually taken a position against focusing on immigration. Next. But growth continues to help fuel sprawl, because ignoring it is not helping it go away. Ignoring problems does not make it go away. The big green groups, they're not afraid to go off script when it comes to promoting renewables or equity. So with pressure from us, they can put growth on their radar screen too. It's possible. So is anybody listening? Well, there is good news on the horizon, to be sure. There are some bold conservation initiatives on the table. Nature needs half, which is to protect half the planet by 2030, quite bold. 30 by 30 is another, and I have the resources here, you can go back and check them out. 30% of land and water conserved by 2030. Next. And their promise is very exciting, as long as they also address growth, and we help them do that, because making room for wildlife is all about having enough land left to give them. The Rewilding Institute, if you don't know about them, they're a group that's really leading the way with a mission focused on landscape, scale, and conservation of large mammals, a group that Dave Foreman was very involved in. And they stand virtually alone in not being afraid to address growth. I know I've written for them myself. EarthOvershoot.org has a great new resource. It's called the Most Valuable Planet Map. If you click on any country, and you can see its growth statistics, and it's at 8billionangels.org. It's really a wonderful resource for everyone. So to do right by wildlife, we have to remember diversity is best supported when biodiversity is prioritized. We have to have biodiversity. We have to take our foot off the growth gas pedal, and it will do more to make all of America livable and non-threatening to wildlife than all of our downstream projects put together. We can do this humanely and with common sense legislation, and it all begins with this difficult conversation. I consider myself to be a dare environmentalist, And that means degrowth, anti-racist environmentalists. I know hundreds of species will be grateful that we did. I want to thank you for listening. I appreciate any and all feedback and how to give this message wings. My website is listed here, and I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you again to KCOR for recording this talk of mine.
Thank you, Karen. Very interesting talk that you just gave, and one that is a very thought-provoking, and certainly touched on some pretty sensitive issues that we are all facing. I reserve the opportunity to give the first question, and I'd like to give John Mayer, if he could unmute and get himself going, then I will get him to go after me. As I say, reserving the opportunity to give the first question. Early on in your talk, you were talking about fragmented habitats as well as ecosystems that are falling apart. How much has that been a part of human population growth, or just the fact that we actually have so much going on with respect to climate change and the things that are happening? Sometimes those things, in my estimation anyway, sometimes those things do not really link. You were showing that they do, but sometimes habitat destruction is more to do with climate change than it is to do with human population.
Well, I like to think of it as overpopulation fuels both. So overpopulation growth is the umbrella, and the more people, the more fossil fuels are burned. That affects, let's take an example. I ran a nature center, 150 acres, and we did all that we could to save the species within our boundaries. The trouble is we had a lot of migrants back and forth. Our climate change has made it right now. I just talked to the naturalist who still works there. Due to lack of rain this is in the Midwest and Minneapolis area, the flowers are not producing enough. The flowers are not producing enough nectar for the bees. The bees then are dying off. The insects, as I mentioned, are dying off so fast. So that has to do with climate change for sure. But then when you look at the migrating species, at one time, Minnesota has had about 402 species, several hundred of which came to my nature center. And those went down over years, much to do with habitats being destroyed by population growth from where they were migrating to. So it's really hard to point fingers in either direction. I think they work together very, very closely, and it's both in so many ways. And I don't think we really have to pick one or the other. It's a great question, but I just think that if you have lack of rain due to climate change, but you also have population growth cutting down habitat, it just spells destruction for both. I would say also that climate change is easier to talk about, therefore I think it gets talked about more, but it doesn't mean it has more impact. It probably means it has, and sometimes more impact when it comes to the polar bears, and growth has more impact when it comes to smaller mammals. So it really depends on a species by species, but I'm just looking at it from a big perspective. So I would say that they're both very much interwoven and very hard to tease apart.
Okay, thank you. Okay, John Mayer, you're up, and Dave Doherty, you're on deck. I hope that everybody can hear me, and we get some more questions that are coming in, please. Thank you.
Hey, the corporate media is on a search and destroy mission for any group who opposes mass immigration or growth. And this has been brought home to me in the last 7 or 8 months repeatedly in different areas. It's to the point where the Stop Sprawl people, which are groups as you would expect, grow up and say we should save farmland, we don't want denser, more congested cities, et cetera, et cetera. These people won't touch population, and they are supporting development at certain levels. And it just seems to me that there's nowhere for us to go on this issue. There's no political outlet. for us. There's certainly, I've only seen one rational discussion of immigration, and that was in Le Devoir, which is owned by a trust, not by the investment banks that own most of the Canadian media. And those investment banks profit from asset inflation, which is driven by mass immigration and growth generally. But my question is, do you know of any groups, any influential groups or political parties which actually touch this subject and deal with population and environment?
Number one, I'm nodding. I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. We have the hurdles in front of this issue are so great, and but I wouldn't completely blame the corporate owned media, because I do think that they do get some really serious backlash from the Twitterverse and individuals sitting in their basements getting angry about things they don't know much about. And so there is pressure from mainly the fringe left that's saying, we can't, if you even talk about this, you must be racist. So there is a lot of canceling going on in the media, and the media doesn't want to be canceled or be called out on being racist. So I will say that we have to find a way forward, and one of those ways forward, I've seen some murmurations that they're going toward an agenda-free journalistic papers that they're not right, they're not left, they're just trying to report what's going on. I did see a really good report this morning, for example. What did it say? Due to population growth, the damage in Florida from Hurricane Ian, I think it is going to be so much greater. I went, oh my God, that's exactly right. And it got reported in a major NPR paper because it's the truth. And I shared it on everything. I go, wow. So I do think that if we can just show the cancel people what they are, which means they're against the First Amendment and we're for the First Amendment, if we carve out that niche, if we can just quiet down that fringe and give them like Roy Beck's book and say, no, 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 no. In fact, in Texas, there was just a protest by African Americans saying that they don't want mass immigration. Well, now who are you going to call racist? African Americans? So I think it's starting to break down. It's going to break down from media feeds. Yes, it feeds corporation, and corporations do benefit when they're immigrants because they can hire cheaper labor. They can get rid of unions. There's a lot of benefits for them, at least temporarily. We all suffer from overpopulation eventually. But I also think that our hope in this small movement that we have of those groups that I've listed, that our hope is to show them that we are a constituency too, and you need to please us as well. So major media, we're going to turn you off because you're not telling us the whole truth. That's where I think the narrow range of future hope lies on this issue, is to keep pounding on those doors and saying, give us the real story. You're not telling us the real story. And we have to give stepping stone blocks to people who are either on the fringe or maybe afraid the fringe left is going to get after them, and give them the building block and say, look, the people who are going to be hurt by massive immigration are they already marginalized. The people who are already rich, they can for at least temporarily, they can shelter themselves away with fences and large properties and all that kind of thing. So I do agree that it's an untouchable issue, but look at right now we're touching on it and hopefully giving people permission to start thinking and having these difficult discussions. I'm going to refer you to my blog and my website. I just wrote a piece that I published today. It's called Dare to Have Difficult Discussions, where I try to give people, we have to give people a permission slip, because otherwise it's the silence that's going to keep us from going. I think there's a lot of people who agree with us. They're just afraid to speak up.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of people, and they are afraid to speak up. But I don't know how we counter the media. Anyway, thanks very much. And
thank you.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Dave Doherty, you're up, and Lynn Oliphant, you're on deck.
So, hi, I don't have a decent camera today, so I'm leaving it off. There are some people who say that Canada could house 100 million people by the end of this century. We have 38.5 million people right now in 2022. I'd like to know what you think the consequences of such an increase in our population would be.
Horrible. I mean, I've studied, because some of my best friends are Canadian, I just want you to know. I have studied a little bit about where there's a reason that most Canadians live within 50 miles of the United States border. That's because the rest of your landscape is unlivable, uninhabitable, cold, terrible soil. And so what you're going to be left with is a massive, dense population, destroying small mammals and wildlife, and more pollution, more crime, more traffic, which is what everything density brings. If the pandemic didn't teach us anything, it should have told us that the closer you live together, the quicker viruses spread, especially ones that are airborne. Just because you see a lot of room when you look on a map of Canada doesn't mean that's room for people. We're high demanding, we're at the top of the food chain, and the food chain needs to look like this. I teach kids, or taught them, now I'm retired now, but that the top of the food chain, we're supposed to be the owls, and down here is supposed to be the insects. And what we've done is we flipped the pyramid around so that we're the most, and we're really more fragile. So I think it makes Canada more fragile. I think it makes it less strong of a country, less livable, less attractive. And just because you, as I said in my essay this morning, that you hopefully will read, it just says, you know, if you're going to invite people in, you better have room for them. You better have food, you better have water. Each province I know has different sources of water, whether it be aquifer water or mountain water, but water is limited, especially, there we go, back into the climate change world. That, and I think we all have not only a right to protect the quality of life that we have in our respective countries, but that we're protecting the future for even those we would let in. If you let in more and more people to places which cannot support them, you're not doing anyone any favors. It would be a much better solution to look at how do you make where they were more livable. And unfortunately, lots of places have corrupt governments who can't just write checks. But we haven't really even had those conversations. We just keep trying to be the release valve for other countries. And we can't keep doing that. Not if we really care about our own landscapes. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Lynn, you're up, and Bill Reese, you're on deck.
Yes, well, I grew up just 3.5 miles from the city limits of Detroit, Michigan. And this was back in the 40s and 50s. It was a wonderful place for wildlife, if you can imagine. There were nighthawks everywhere. There were bats every evening in the spring. There were flights of woodcock that came into the park at the end of our neighborhood. I could catch 30 full-grown adult toads in my backyard any day that I wanted to walk out there. That has disappeared entirely, along with the remnant swamps and the old growth forest that has now been changed into 7-Elevens, and the park, which was a wonderful wildlife area, has now been improved at a cost of $1.3 million by clearing out the brush, along with all the wildlife and all the wildflowers. It's just gone. I now live in Saskatoon, and it's better here, but it's going exactly the same way that Royal Oak did north of Detroit. Last year was a drought, and we lost wildlife habitat like you wouldn't believe. Any slough that was dry is now under cultivation. It's gone. I got sucked into single species management while I was here and worked on the peregrine recovery, we bred over 500 peregrines for release. It sent a bad message to the world that if you just pour more money into single species management by breeding them in captivity and releasing them to the wild, that we can solve the wildlife crisis. That's just insanity.
I didn't hear a question in there, but I love everything you said.
I guess one of my questions is why are we still focused on single species management when the problem is the growth of the human enterprise?
Oh, that is the $1 million question. I would say that there's a second book that I wrote called Change Our Stories, Change the World. Some people have come out and said that, oh, if we just had women in charge, things would be better. I don't agree with that, even though I'm a woman. I would say we have to change our story. We haven't changed our story, Lynn. We haven't realized, we haven't been awakened, we haven't moved upstream enough to say, this is only working temporarily for certain species. But I also would say it gets funded. I mean, if you apply for a grant to save peregrine falcons, if you get that funded. If you apply for a grant to reduce the human enterprise, you'll be waiting at the mailbox for a really long time. It doesn't get funded. So funding follows ideas, ideas follow narrative, and the narrative still is that I'm going to throw a few coins to your species management, then I can call myself a wildlife enthusiast, can I? I once, just a story I want to tell you about that is that my nature center is very close to the Twin Cities airport, and a $60,000 grant was given to study to see whether it was more polluted than the fen up in Lake Itasca State Park, which is the beginning of the Mississippi River. And I said, you know, I'm going to save you $60,000. It's much worse. It turned out that after spending $60,000, they found out that we were last on the list of 26 different marshes and other sloughs and things that were studied. But now somebody somewhere can put on their resume, I love nature because look what I gave money to, look what I studied. So we have to stop giving credit to this type of effort, because throwing money at research, we don't need any more research. Wildlife is going to hell in a handbasket, and we're giving them the handbasket of human enterprise and growth. And that's what we need to study. We need to study, how do we degrow, not how do we save each individual species, because it's really window dressing this whole issue. I couldn't agree with you more, and thank you for your comments and question.
Thank you, Karen.
Bill, you're on, and on deck is John Legg. And Bill, you've had a couple of comments on the chat line that I think are quite prescient. If you could sort of talk to both of them that you've had on there, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I thought that was a very nice summary. The same people who in Canada are promoting 100 million as our population by the end of the century are working to increase the US population to 1 billion by the end of the century. So there seems to be a cross-border disease here. I just wondered if you've come across Iglesias or any of these other folks.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And by the way, hi, Bill. It's great to see you. Guess what? Guess who's giving him a platform? The Breakthrough Institute.
Of course.
Of course, where I spoke and nearly got run out of town a few years back.
But
But
yeah, ongoing battle with those guys.
oh my goodness, yes. Breakthrough to what? Is my question. I think I would love to write a piece with you, Bill, if I could be so bold, and it would be on nature's form of eugenics. We talk about nature's got a eugenics in plan for us, and we're actually handing them the platter. We're say, please kill us off. Please kill us off. They call us eugenicists by not wanting mass immigration, but nature is really the ultimate eugenicist. It's going to get rid of us because we have decided that we don't have to obey the laws of physics or the laws of nature, any of nature's laws. We're somehow exempt. We are exceptional, and it's going to come back to bite us. And of course, I've heard these ridiculous notions, and it comes from this very anthropocentric narrative that says if humans are great, then a lot of humans are even greater. And I think that's the narrative we have to break. Is like, you can have these two truths. Each baby, each person, we all know children, we all know people with babies, their grandchildren, that we love them all. But as a whole, it's a beast, and the beast has to be tamed. And it can be done in a humane way if we just could silence those people who are doing this when it comes to hearing this issue. They don't want to hear about it. Let's just plow ahead. And the problem is, we're all on the same planet. We're all suffer, probably not in the same degrees at the same time, but we all will end up suffering, and we already are suffering. I don't like to put overpopulation's wrath in the future. It's here, it's now, we're experiencing it right now. So I completely agree, Bill, as I always do with your work.
Yeah, what you're saying is a marvelous summary of Julian Simon's dictum, that the greatest resource is the human mind. So he would argue, and others have picked it up, that almost all resources are products of mind, not of nature. For example, nobody knew what coal was until somebody figured out how to use it as an industrial machine. So the basic tenet here is that since the human mind is the greatest resource, the more humans there are, the more resources we create. And you can still find paper after paper showing that with more people, the quantity and price of resources, the quantity is going up and the price is coming down. It's complete nonsense most recently, but that's the dictum here. The other comment I made is that one way to reduce immigration pressure is for northern, western, however you want to call it, high income countries to stop messing up the land and resource base of poorer countries. Because we're creating conditions in many parts of Latin America and Asia, Africa, and so on, that makes it intolerable for the indigenous populations to survive. So of course, that creates enormous pressure for them to want to leave, and therefore great pressure on our immigration policies. So what we need to do is to reconstruct much of the third world so people can stay in their own country with pride. And we have to stop exploiting and destroying what they have.
But let me ask you, answer one more thing, because this is a personal thing. I know of several immigrants who came here as wealthy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes.
And they came here, but not because of any natural resource. They came here because they needed more social freedoms. They were in the LGBTQ community, and they came here to live a freer life. So in addition to having, and it would help if we didn't send, I'm aware that our missionaries went into Uganda and made the whole gay thing that part of the culture, and so we've destroyed some of their social fabric by telling them that they have to take on these super Christian mores and so on. But I would also add to what you're saying is that we have to also encourage freedoms, because there's just a lot of people who don't want to live in oppression, whether or not they have the natural resources or not.
I guess I'm referring, look, we have an immoral immigration policy in Canada because we're preferentially allowing people in who have lots of money, who have lots of talent. We're bleeding less developed countries of their highest resources in terms of human resources. So that's immoral. So I'm really referring to the pressure that we see with people dying in rafts trying to flee from North Africa, or the enormous pressures at the US southern border of people from South America streaming north. These aren't wealthy, privileged people. These are the relatively impoverished and poor who are getting in by the millions. And it's to a very large extent the fault of our own policy. At any rate, I thought it's an important topic. By the way, another thing, just human beings are part of every ecosystem on Earth. In fact, we've shown with our eco-footprint analysis that we are the largest consumer organism that has ever existed, both herbivore and carnivore, in every single major ecosystem on the planet. So I use the term competitive displacement. The expansion of the human enterprise necessarily displaces non-human species from the constant, in fact, reducing flow of solar energy through the planet. As we destroy ecosystems, the amount of energy appropriated by photosynthesis is in decline, and we're taking more and more of it. So every additional human and every addition to our accoutrements and artifacts is a loss to the rest of nature. So there's a necessary and absolute conflict between the growth of the human enterprise and the conservation of nature. So whenever I hear a politician stand up and say there's no conflict between growing the economy and keeping the environment intact, it's utter nonsense, completely in defiance of natural law, including and particularly the second law of thermodynamics. So got a lot of-
Absolutely. In fact, I know that Bill Ryerson, another colleague that we love so much, said that the worst thing that could happen to the human is to actually discover a really magic fuel that would have no immediate, climate change impact, and you wouldn't destroy mountaintops to do that, because it would just keep the enterprise going. It's like, I'll plug into this instead of this and I'm okay, right? No, we have to degrow. We have to, we have to do this. We have to, they have these, I love it. They call it street calming. Have you heard that? Is that common? We're going to calm the street. No, you're not unless you get rid of a lot of cars. We're going to put the car, the solutions are they're almost laughable if it wasn't so sad.
Thank you very much. So
you,
John
Al.
Legg,
Thank you.
your next question, and Ted Manning, you're on deck.
Thank you, Jean. Karen, excellent presentation. I think you're preaching to the converted here, but you did near the end say, how do we give these arguments wings? And of course, as usual, Bill Reese had some very good and blunt comments. I used to be a diplomat, and I try to be more and more blunt now because it's just more direct. So I have two suggestions
Okay.
as to how you might improve your message,
Okay.
which is already excellent. But anyway, one of the Netflix type of film that I like is, especially because I guess I like his background knowledge and his wonderful British accent. That's David Attenborough. Yes, exactly.
I just wish you were younger. My husband wouldn't have a prayer. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, I'm always so bowled over by the beauty, and quite frankly, the law of the jungle is part of that beauty, the really wild animals. And I'm not sort of preaching to you to spend a lot more money on the visual part of your presentation, but if you would please just consider, and this is just the first suggestion, really wild animals. In other words, you did have a few tigers, and but I mean, if you had the wherewithal to include a herd of elephants or some feline characters out there, all of the cat family, your imagination is at least as good as mine. But that to me always, it really, if you can then make the link, you see, between the overwhelming population growth and taking away their habitat. Anyway, that's just one suggestion. The other one has to do with immigration is not simply a transfer of numbers from one country to the other, or if you wish, anyway, out there and in here. No, it's a conversion, and Bill mentioned this at the end of his comments. It's a conversion of a low consuming person to a high consuming person. So multiply that by a number of tens or hundreds of thousands every year, and what are you doing to the world? I mean, it makes the people who believe in the message of the Club of Rome, limits to growth. And by the way, I just say this in passing. I don't know how that title is comes out in the other languages, but in French, it is, and I translate directly from French to English, it is halt to growth, halte à la croissance. And I think,
I like that better.
well, I think that the Meadows couple, Dennis and Danilla, or vice versa, because she was apparently the real spark plug, that was sort of toning down the message somehow, and they expected the analytical minds to make the messages speak for themselves. Well, they don't really, at least not by the title, Limits to Growth. There are limits, and I'll just comment, this appears a little bit negative, but you can take the sense of humor of a poet friend of mine. He refuses to call our species Homo sapiens. He prefers the term Homo stupidus. And quite frankly, I think it's right on, because we are, what we're doing to this ball in the universe it's a sort of a crime in itself. Anyway, I just the two comments, one about the really wild animals and visual attraction, and two, to not just talk about immigration, but talk about low consuming people, turn them into high consuming people. So what are you really doing? Now, of course, all this message is lost on the growth people, but just what are your comments about those two suggestions?
Oh, I take them to heart, and I agree. And I think this talk could have been 3 hours long, and including all that stuff. I agree with you. The statistic that I heard, Ted, is that every immigrant that comes from a less consuming country into the United States will increase their global footprint 4 times over. So they will, they'll go from, maybe a small place. I know of a woman who moved here from South America, who didn't have, for example, running water, and then they come here and all of a sudden they have a microwave and so on. So the transfer of low energy to high energy and more consumption is very much of a climate. That's where I think a lot of the climate change comes from, in direct correlation to overpopulation, to be sure. I also agree with you that I'm a huge fan of David Attenborough, who's I think he's a patron of Population Matters in England, and he, whenever I can't stand it anymore, I have to watch more. I think I've watched all of his Netflix specials about 3 or 4 times each, because it is very inspiring. And I do agree. And I think that when people call us human stupidus, I think the first thing I would say is we are also very successful to our own demise. So we have figured out how to inhabit every biome on the planet. That's pretty remarkable if you think about it. In one layer, it's remarkable that someone could adapt to eating, blubber, all the way to eating squash, and survive. So we come along and we cure diseases. And as I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Quinn, who wrote the whole Ishmael series, he basically said that nature has a way of keeping us in check with our environment. And we look at nature and say, no, we're not going to die of disease. We're going to cure them all. We're not going to die of storms. We're going to warn people, get away from the storm. So nature's trying to keep us in check, and we keep going, no, punch back. So I think that's part of it too, is that we're very, very successful in a place that cannot handle our success. I think that's the way I like to frame it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank
and
you.
John. Ted, you're on now, and Andrew Welsh, you're on deck.
Okay, well, I'm going to be the resident heretic, but I mean, humans are probably qualified to become an endangered species, even if they have to do it themselves. And I think we could get funding for that if we went to the right places. But that said, I don't think we can solve the problem one country at a time, even if you're in the largest and best country in the world or the one that has the most resources per capita. I don't think there's enough resources on the planet to allow us to kill enough of the other ones to keep them from coming across our borders. And I think, therefore, that as we've been running at for a while in the Club of Rome, is to try and come up with a holistic way of reducing population growth and reducing consumption to within the known capacity of the ecosystem to handle us and other species. So I get very worried when I hear even my own country talking about limiting immigration. We did a study some decades ago when I was running the Canada Land Inventory in terms of the carrying capacity for Canada for people. And it was over 100,000. And the reason for that was the assumptions regarding the consumption patterns they would have, how much they would eat per capita, and they certainly didn't behave like our rich folks in the best suburbs these days. But you use by analogy the fact that there were more people living in Manchuria, in fact, in one province in Manchuria than in Canada at the time. And they were eating adequately, not wonderfully, but the actual carrying capacity under those sociological, economic, and other conditions was about 100 million. So I get worried when people start using certain biophysical limits when they do not understand the relationship amongst levels of consumption, governance, and other things. It's far more complex. Anyway, those are just a few comments I wanted. I like the presentation here, but I'm increasingly looking at the notion of, do we have the ability to reduce the population bomb where it's happening now, or do we in fact have to deal with the spillover that is necessarily going to happen because we don't have the governance structures that would allow us to build a wall around every country on the planet? So I know that's a heck of a mix of questions, but Karen, have a thrash at them.
Let me have it. First of all, I really appreciate what a nice, rational challenge. I love that. These are the kind of discussions we have to have. I think that I had a friend who has since died, who for the United Nations was working very hard on evaluating every country and their biocapacity to see how, from that perspective, for example, Brazil, more rich in water, that kind of thing. So biocapacity varies from country to country. That's for absolute sure. And that was an effort that he began. I don't know if it's in some, in some locked closet at the United Nations right now or where it is, but that is very definitely it. What I am coming from is being that those things take a long time. I totally agree with that energy and that effort. Right now, today, with a swipe of a pen, we could stop, at least in my country, millions of coming to our doors to a place which is already suffering from drought in the West. And we have 500,000 homeless in the United States right now. What I mean, it's more immediate. It needs to be done humanely. And this is really important, it is what Garrett Hardin, the great population philosopher, said: there are potholes all over the world, but we only have the power to deal with the potholes in our own country. So I'm looking, Ted, at pulling the levers where I have them available. I would absolutely love, and I know Population Media Center does this around the world, to culturally appropriately try to look at how to have smaller families, and other places are trying to get us to live lower on the food chain and not need a new iPhone every 5 minutes, no matter what Apple tells us we need to have. I mean, all those efforts are very, very important and good. but they're slow and nature is moving so fast against us.
Mhm.
It's almost like it might be the low hanging fruit, but it's the only fruit I can reach. And that's what I'm saying. I totally agree with your concept, but I will tell you, and I have to be honest, I've been working in this ever since I became an advisor on world population balance, the old form of the organization of what's now called population balance, back in the 90s. And I believe, along with its creator and founder, who became a very dear friend of mine, Dave Paxson, that we wouldn't really talk about immigration, because if you really educated people about overpopulation, they would just get it. Well, it's a lot like trickle down economics. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's like it's what I call tinkle down economics. We just get pissed on, excuse my language, but
Very apt.
but what I'm saying is that you can't just paint the big picture and hope people will get it. Not in a world where, at least in our country, our education systems are just failing. They're failing children. They're not preparing them for a climate change world. They're not preparing them. They're not teaching them what ecology even is, how they depend, if the water keeps coming out of the faucet, why are you telling me it's a problem? And so I do, hats off to your perspective. I do agree that there are much bigger changes that have to be made, but it's more like an emergency valve for, can I just stop that high rise from coming in my neighborhood? And I can't do that if the demand for housing won't stop, and I can't do that if I don't deal with immigration. So it's really, it's more of a downstream approach to a very upstream issue.
Thank you very much. That was fun.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Karen. Andrew, you're up next, and on deck is Mike Hanauer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Shragg. As a matter of fact, a lot of the things that you covered in your presentation are things that I, in fact, included in a presentation 2 weeks ago in the very same forum.
That's why you look familiar. Okay.
Well, there you go. Because I too think that nature is trying to keep us in check. And in fact, that it solved that problem. It's easily solved that problem by making the negative feedback ourselves. That's done. So the challenge, I'm going to sort of talk about the same challenge that John Legg talked about a bit, because you wanted to try and give these arguments wings. I fully understood what you're talking about in terms of the factors of overpopulation and what we're doing to the wildlife. What I said in the comment was, and it's been covered a little bit in the comments that have come up since, that 88% of the population growth in the United States is immigration. I couldn't understand what the impact of immigration was on the world population growth. It seems to me that it's zero.
Yeah.
But you're saying that they can come from an area of low consumption to an area of high consumption, and that's the problem, among other things. But it seems to me that if you want to give this problem wings, if you want to get a lot more people on board, if you want to stop having to be throwing up all these additional slides about I'm not a racist, and don't throw me out of town, why pick up that baggage? Why go there in the first place? Because the immigration argument to me seems to be, I mean, I hear what you're saying, low-hanging fruit, we could fix these potholes. Well, no, I don't see what impact controlling immigration has on the elephant population or the population of lemurs elsewhere, except for the fact of the argument of the high consumption, low consumption, which becomes a whole moral baggage of we should be allowed to consume more and at a higher level, but those people have to keep consuming at a low amount. We do not want them here. And if we want just the rich and smart people, so we're draining them out of that country, no. We should leave them in their country so that their country will become high consumers too. My question is not to argue this point, but why even go there if we want to have the greatest appeal to people about the real population problem and the real global nature of the population? Why do we introduce this thing where we have to spend half of our time defending ourselves as being non-racist? That's the question.
Wonderful question. And a question that I have lived in my, as I was trying to explain before, I spent, I would say, the first 3/4 of my activism not talking about it at all. And then my eyes were open to my reach. And as much as I want, I'm showing my hand here, as much as I want to be saving lemurs in Madagascar, they do have an issue with overpopulation that's unique to them. We have one that's unique to us. What I can save is the bobcat. I can save the lynx. I can save the black-footed ferret. I can save the wildlife here, the fox. Well, the coyotes will probably do pretty well on their own, but I have power. Where's my power? My power is to reduce the impact of human numbers. Doesn't matter where they come from, except that they're coming from mostly this source, and I'm trying to save the animals within the boundaries of the United States. And people in Canada, you know, you're looking at some of the and you have the power. You don't have the power. It would be great to say to the leaders of all these countries with this fantastic wildlife that's, you know, so sexy. Please reduce your population. You'll have more elephants. You'll have more everything else. But we don't have that kind of power. What we do have the kind of power is to say, in relationship to our landscape, we have to reduce the human pressure, both consumption and overpopulation. I don't like to have that debate because I see them as this. I don't think you can have overpopulation and not have overconsumption, because I looked it up once. We throw out in the United States 150 billion toothbrushes a year, plastic toothbrushes. And our response to that is, well, let's just get biodegradable toothbrushes. Well, that has to come from bamboo, and the bamboo has to come from Vietnam or wherever. And you know, you don't want people to stop brushing their teeth either. That's a lot of bad breath in the world. So you've got a lot of overconsumption. And just like, you know, what was it, the world, Gandhi once said years ago, the world can handle the world's need, not the world's greed. Well, I don't believe that's true anymore. Well, the world can't handle the world's need anymore. So just having a lot of humans on the planet is displacing everything, creating pollution in our wake, all the horrible things we do as Homo sapien. What I'm saying is the reason I shifted, and it's a great question, Andrew, the reason I shifted to talking more about immigration, I try not to dominate, but it's like saying growth is bad, but we won't tell you how we're growing. How many people are aware that during the pandemic, the United States kept growing because of our immigration? You know, they thought, oh, you know, we're just gonna, all these people are dying. No, we have replaced them very quickly. Therefore, we haven't been able to reduce our human footprint and its effect on wildlife and everything else. So what I'm saying is we have to at least demonstrate where, I talk about levers, where our power is. I can do something. I'm not very successful at it, I'll admit, but I know that I vote, I have access to a representative, they're in Washington, they make the laws. I don't have any power in Canada. I don't have any power in Madagascar. But my power here is to say, how are we growing? It's a subset, to be sure, but it isn't about who's coming in. It's about that we are at 333 million in the United States compared to your, what, about 30 million? It's like, it's just nuts. And I'm trying to stop that craziness. I'm not stopping my work on overpopulation. I mean, I would love the UN or some global body to start having that as their top conversation too, along with war and nuclear weapons and all the things they have to deal with. Because if we could get rid of all of the nuclear war in the world, we know that overpopulation is a bomb, like Paul Ehrlich said. So I don't disagree with you, Andrew, basically. I just disagree with you in a practical way, if that makes sense.
Okay, if I could ask just one quick follow-up question. I get that you want to focus on the things that you have the power and control over.
Right.
How would you compare the number of boats and planes coming into the US with immigrants versus the number of ships and planes coming in with resources from around the world, so that you say, okay, well, I can't affect the the orangutan population because I have no control over the palm oil consumption in those countries. Surely the consumption in the United States that you do have control over is probably the largest factor on the habitat destruction of these animals in their own home countries. Presumably, there's a lot more immigration of resources into the United States than there is, in fact, immigration of people.
Absolutely. I just want you to know everything I'm wearing today is from a thrift store. So I'm totally for lowering our footprint.
But you don't talk about that. You talk about immigration.
Well, that's because it's the thing that isn't talked about. It's everything else gets so much press. I'll leave that to those people. Like I work against palm oil. I belong to 4 co-ops. I know that the orangutans of Borneo are being hurt by the palm oil. I work on all that stuff. But this is the area where I see the least amount of attention being given for the wrong reasons, because they think that we are inhumane. But absolutely, I'm talking to you from my 1-bedroom house on 1/3 of an acre where I've never used pesticides. I try to do all those things. And you know what? I look up and I see all this growth and it doesn't feel like it matters. Do you know what I'm saying, Andrew? I do all those things. I've been a recycling coordinator for over 30 years, trying to get people to not throw out things. And I actually got composted started in our community. I did a composting video. You can look online. It's on there somewhere. I've done all that stuff. And I still believe in it. But what I'm seeing is that the thing we're not talking about seems to be undercutting everything I've done for my whole life, if that makes any sense.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew, Karen. And I'm going to call on Vic Buxton next. And after that, I will read Mike Hanauer's question because he's had to leave. So Vic, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I guess everyone around this table knows that the real issue here it limits to growth, and that's undisputed. You know, and with climate change, animals move as well as human moves, and there's migration. And the issue that I see in front of us is one that we're not confronting the problem in a root cause sense. Okay, and I think this is a moral issue associated by singling out immigration, because people, for example, starving in Somalia right now, not enough food. It's induced by climate change, which is everybody's creation on the planet. And so by limiting that, I don't agree with the criteria used in Canada, which is a point system, to allow those that aren't going to produce any financial burden on Canada be the ones that are let in, and not the poor immigrants that are starving to death. Like, I find that morally terribly. I think that based on experience, and my experience personally with the Montreal Protocol, we had a group called the Group of 77 that really they used chlorofluorocarbons for preservation of food supply, but they weren't the producers of it. And they were worried, saying, I can't sign on to any treaty to control these substances. I'm putting our entire population at risk. So the answer is, you've got to find the root cause and you've got to address the root cause. In the case of them, we had to find ways and means of allowing them to survive the transition period. And in the case, I think, of the population overgrowth that we haven't really addressed or discovered or focused on any comprehensive global means of addressing the issue. And I've made suggestion years ago that what we really need is we need to create global support for an environmental security council, just like we have it for war and peace, and then encourage everybody with consequences for not complying with this. And then we can harness this program in a holistic way. And I don't think singling out migration as the issue that, oh, I can handle that, so forget the rest, is not going to solve the problem. All it's going to do is hurt and penalize the most fortunate people on the planet. Anyway, that's my observation. And my question
First of all, again, another articulate, great idea. Good. Thank you very much for the question. I think what one of the things I've been hearing and in this issue and today is, it really isn't either or. In other words, I love the idea. I wrote it down even. Your global support. I think that's fantastic idea. Sign me up. I'll go carry a placard for you. It's not an either or situation. It's not like like I said, I worked very, very upstream on this issue for many, many years and saw my own community crumbling because of, like I said, it's not who is coming in. I don't like this point. It just, are we going to say that the more desperate you are, the more way you get in, or whatever it is, eventually those people will become consumers of resources in your area. And I'm not talking about NIMBY. I'm just like I'm saying that we need to do both. We need to be able to, I don't want people to think I had like 4 or 5 slides on immigration. I'm not focused on it. I'm saying that this is where growth within my reach comes from. And we need to address this globally, because it isn't going to be solved at our borders, for sure. I totally agree with you, Vic. This is not an issue we can solve at our borders. It's an issue that we can somehow make some effort, because there is no global effort right now. If there were a global effort, I'd be knocking on their door and saying, could you just give us, we need to rate all countries in a maybe a color-coded system that says this country, if this country is, pick a color, this country is striped color, no more, because we've measured their resources and they're going to run out of water in 20 years. And I look at Cape Town, South Africa, and I look at how their water stress is so bad, but they've added 4 million people since 1970. And I bet back in 1970, if someone said, you've got to do something about migration, in their case, it would be inward migration, not necessarily from other countries, or we're going to run out of water in 50 years. And they, forget about it. We've got plenty of resources. I think that's what I'm talking about is looking, it's what is that? The global action and the local action have to work together. Right now, all I see is some power on the local level and very little power on the global level. If we had your fantastic idea of a global support working on, and I do believe that they have to both happen for any long-term success. Right now, we don't have that, but sign me up if you get it going, or I'll help you.
Well, if
Thank
I
you
can
very
make
much.
another comment, I guess my concern is the lack of focus on root causes. Now let's look at the question of population. Why in poor countries do we have maximum, family growth? And it's usually because of fears about starvation. You want to make sure your kids, you got enough kids that can protect you in your old age, or it's religious, like the historical perspective of the Catholic Church, build the Catholic community. These are all taking us in the wrong direction for a finite planet in terms of its capacity to support people. But where is the focus on this and the resolution and harnessing of these mitigating factors that are destroying the planet? And there's
Before you go with that, thank you for that comment, Vic. We have to move on to other people. There are a few other people who have not had an opportunity to speak to Karen today. So we're going to move on from that. Mike had to leave the talk, but he has asked me to ask his question. He said, Karen, was this pretty much the same kind of presentation that was rejected by the IWS? And he thinks that you're talking about some of this talk would provide some insight to that.
Oh, yes, it was. It was the same talk. I only added a few things referring to Canada to make it more relevant to you guys.
Thank you. And we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, John Hollins, you have the next question, and I would have Peter McKinnon on deck. So John, if you can unmute, please. I didn't get a chance to say anything to you first off, so please go ahead. John, are you there?
Coming.
Oh, good.
Okay,
thank you. Sorry, it was my fault.
I'm going to have to get a drink of water, but I can hear you because I'm losing my voice. Go ahead.
These topics that we address routinely seem despairing. But I'd like to just read you a short quotation that will be on the KCOR website next Saturday morning. Even if there is no hope, we have to do something. Not having hope is not an excuse for not doing anything, but the thing we need more than hope is action, because once there is action, there is hope. That's Greta Thunberg. When I listen to you and you're talking to people who, some of them are almost as old as I am, we don't have many young people here at all, and the one or two university students we have on sometimes are not here today, which is unfortunate. Greta Thunberg is an extraordinary phenomenon in getting some straightforward, simple ideas into the minds of younger people and through them to older people. Do you see any way of picking up on what she's done to get this message about limits to growth to the politicians and most of the corporate decision makers who simply do not understand?
Well, first of all, I would like to hear Greta give a very direct, succinct message about overpopulation. And before she does that, I would welcome her into a chat room with people who've been working on this issue like myself for many, many, many years, because I have been a fan and followed her for a really long time and all the things. She was actually at the same COP25 conference that I spoke to in Brazil, not Brazil, it was going to be in South, it was in, ended up being in Spain. And the message is on climate and how we need to reduce our consumption and so on. All good messages, all clear messages, but with her wisdom and with her succinct way of saying things and direct way, I think she could be very, very helpful to this movement. I think there are a lot of young people deciding not to have children because of what she. So there's been a lot of indirect support for smaller families from what she said, because she's really pointed out that it's very clearly a grim future that the older folks who have destroyed the planet ahead of them, and I think there's a great deal of options and opportunities to be had. Not just, there are other young people that are around the world who are working in grassroots issues like this. It would be really nice. What I've always really, John, I really always wanted to sit down in a room and talk about what would be the best messaging that young people would want to hear. That doesn't sound like we're telling them what to do, but giving them the most moral and honest option for what we have to do going forward, because we're in such a pickle environmentally. So yeah, I actually wanted to give you just a minute on what I think of what she said about hope and action. I totally agree. A lot of people ask me if I'm hopeful. I said, I don't even think about hope. I think about integrity, and I think about truth, and I think about science, and I think about physics, and I think about being a mouthpiece for those things and being unattached to the outcome so I can keep going and doing what I do, which is trying to speak the truth about halt to growth, which I like that better than limits. Say
that again? What
halt
was
to growth rather than limits to growth.
Yes.
We have to halt it. We have to stop growing. Just
Yes.
stop. It's kind of like the smoking issue. You can't smoke a little bit and hope you don't get lung cancer. You gotta stop growing.
Thank you. Thank you for that very much. I have Peter McKinnon on deck, and unfortunately, there's been a lot of people who've had other comments, but they've had an opportunity to address things. I think our last questioner will be Madeline Weld. So Peter, you're next.
I don't want to talk to Madeline.
Okay, Peter, you're next, and Madeline, you're on deck.
Thank you, Jean. Karen, I'm sorry I missed your presentation. I came in late, had another commitment, but I do follow these meetings and made some comments. So I guess I've been asked to maybe make something about one of my comments. there was discussion about, the taking of the best and brightest from various parts of the world and trying to concentrate them in our part of the world, if you like. And I just wanted to point out that there is a really successful initiative in Africa. It's called the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, the Next Einstein Initiative. There's a whole story behind the use of the name Einstein, but it's been designed specifically to bring mathematical sciences, not to create mathematicians, but to apply mathematics to modern society in Africa by Africans. And so this is creating 15 centers of excellence. We raised $100 million for this. It won a TED Prize for its both presentation and the cause. And in fact, several tens of millions of dollars came in because it won the TED Prize, unsolicited, quite remarkable. If you want to get money for an initiative, win a TED Prize, and you'll be surprised where the money comes from. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that this is underway. It's already 6 centers of excellence have been created. They're all Pan-African, and there's 15 in the plan.
Can you
that
give me
was
the
one
name of it
comment.
again? It's Centers of Excellence? Is that what they're called?
With effect, they're centers of excellence. Yes, they're, or some people might even call them a university, but they specialize in
what's the name of the
mathematical
program?
sciences.
What's the name of the program, and what is it?
The African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, Next Einstein Initiative. Now,
That's a mouthful.
yeah, it is. Well, the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences started in Cape Town with 1 center. It's a very interesting story how that happened, but it started there. Nelson Mandela was a serious promoter of it, and as was Stephen Hawking. So I had some great sponsors in terms of those who were in both politics and in science. This initiative was started by Neil Turok, who was the immediate past director of the Perviter Institute for Theoretical Physics in Waterloo. And he was recruited there by one of Canada's successful entrepreneurs to head up that institute. He was a full professor at Cambridge University with Stephen Hawking on his staff. So just to put a context, there's a lot of good, bright people behind this initiative, and it's being rolling out, and it's designed specifically to help people in the developing world help themselves, as opposed to sending our consultants there.
Sounds like a plan.
So it was just a comment I was making. It picked up on some of the discussion about, robbing, I use the word, from the developing world to bring to our world. This is not like that. In fact, those who do come out of this school into the developed world, actually almost all of them go back with doctorates in some field.
Peter, I guess I really believe that the solutions are not our problem, it's getting to them. And thank you for being involved. I think that I don't focus on, I think the solutions are there. First, we have to understand what the problem is. I know so many people that, were told by the cigarette companies that smoking was sexy, and they bought it, and they were given, and then finally, after we showed them oh my goodness, this is really bad. Then we came up with, how about if we just say in my own park, you can't smoke here anymore. Guess what? By the time I said that, no problems. Okay, we won't. I couldn't have said it right away because people didn't understand. So I really think the progress towards solutions is that you have to first understand what the problem is. And there's a lot of creative, smart people out there that could help us. They just have to understand the limits to what we're dealing with on this planet. So I really thank you for that. I will look it up.
Well, it's definitely, it's definitely this initiative, which has actually got the support of all 54 countries in Africa. The African Union unanimously is supporting it. UNESCO is supporting it, etc. It's very successful, and it's if we can only replicate these kinds of things by thinking out of the box to solve a problem that we have created, even trying to solve problems, because this is getting Africans helping themselves solve problems.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you very much. Madeline, you're on now, and you can share a screen if you still want to do that.
Okay, thank you. So Karen, I want to thank you for your talk and for directly addressing the population issue. And I'm going to screen share here. Can everybody see this, Giraffe? Yeah. Oh,
yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, we can.
So the population issue, as Karen has pointed out, gets sort of sidelined, which is why she focused on it. And here's a picture of a giraffe in Nairobi National Park, which is being threatened ever more by a growing population, as shown by this picture. And this giraffe is threatened not by overconsumption, but directly by population growth. And it's shown here, it's the population of giraffes have decreased by 2 orders of magnitude since the early 1900s, from 2.5 million to about 68,000. Whereas the population of Nairobi has increased from 14,000 to 4.7 million. So is it any wonder that the giraffes park is being encroached on? And the population of Africa has increased from 100 million in 1900 to 1.4 billion today. And I believe that is why we see such, and this is Madagascar, for instance. Now, I don't think Madagascar's wildlife is being threatened by anyone's overconsumption. It's an island. I mean, it has resources, but the deforestation is not being caused by Macmillan Bloedel, the forestry country, but simply by an expansion of population. Here we see from 1975 to 2025. And you can look at similar things in the, whoops, wrong one, in the, oh, maybe I turned it off, in the Horn of Africa. The population of Somalia, for instance, has increased by 7-fold or so. Yeah, here, like Somalia, oh, sorry, 6-fold since from 1970 to 2020, and Ethiopia also, and Kenya also. So I think we do have to address population directly. I can stop sharing now. We do have to address population directly. We can't avoid it. And thank you for doing it.
Well, here's something that is a real quagmire. The Carter Foundation was very concerned about Guinea worm in Africa. And at the time, 100 million children were dying of Guinea worm. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they invented these straws and they gave them all to children throughout Africa and reduced the deaths of by Guinea worm from 100 million down to 100. Fantastic, right? Right. Fantastic. But a global perspective on so much of Africa is desert and savanna and not able to support a lot of crops and so on. Now, what do you do with the 100 million children that no longer are dying from this horrible disease? And so we've done a lot to help promote growth in Africa by giving them these tools for not having to wrestle with all these diseases. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of created a problem by coming in, as Peter said, and going in and trying to solve problems. And a lot of these are so well-intentioned. I'm not disputing that they're well-intentioned.
As they say, we've been good on death control. We've been not so good on birth control.
Oh, say that again, loud and proud. That is so right. That is so right. And, and that's the relationship I wish people would see, that unless you have births and deaths even, you're going to still have growth. And we're doing that by 81 million a year. So is it okay? If it's not okay to talk about birth control, we just got rid of Roe v. Wade in this country. And we're on the brink of turning us into the Handmaid's Tale. At the same time, so if births are going to go up and deaths go down, we're creating the population problem. Exactly. And so wouldn't, to me, if you're talking about morality, somebody brought up morality, isn't it more moral to control births than allow deaths to increase? I mean, there's where the morality lies.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And that concludes our last question for this particular session. And with that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Karen very much for what has obviously become an extremely interesting and generated a lot of questions your talk has done for us. So thank you so much for that, Karen. And as the chairman of KCOR, it has been my privilege and pleasure to have the opportunity to thank you and also to be your master of ceremonies for this pretty interesting topic. And for everybody else who's still online and you've not been to our presentations before, I ask that you go to our website, canadiancorps.com. And if you look at the Stay Informed section and sign up for that, you will be able to see the link to this talk when it goes up online. And you will also find all of the other talks that we have had in the past. You can look at all of those, and you will have the opportunity to also become a member of K-Corps if you're interested in that. So I thank you very, very much for everybody coming. And Karen, thank you for an absolutely fabulous presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.